Annyeonghaseyo, and welcome to Korea's Open Infrastructure Community Day. My name is Steve Helvie, and I'm the VP of Channel for the Open Compute Project, or OCP. And today I'll be talking about how open hardware is growing across Asia, but more specifically, how open compute designs or open source hardware is impacting the market. And since most of you viewing today may be having more of a software background, I'm going to be talking about how open software is being used on top of open hardware to develop full integrated solutions. But before I begin, I want to say thank you to Jung-Soo Kim, who is our Korean community lead. Jung-Soo is a great resource for everyone in Korea. He's very passionate and very knowledgeable about open hardware, so I encourage you to reach out to Jung-Soo and connect. He's done some amazing things for OCP in Korea. And we thank you very much, Jung-Soo, for all of your efforts. So as we look at the open source hardware market, there are really two categories that I want to make sure and define to demonstrate the trends. The first is OEM, or original equipment manufacturer. The second is ODM, or white box. An OEM is someone who buys all the components from a manufacturer, packages those components up, resells them under their own brand name. They try to sell to the broadest part of the market, and most of their support is around a managed service approach. Whereas an ODM, or a white box, is the actual manufacturer of those components. They will do full product lifecycle. They will manufacture maybe specialized solutions for specific customers. And most of their support is product centric. Now, in the past, if I wanted to buy some hardware, I would normally buy directly from an OEM. But let me show you what has been happening the last few years. This is from 2016 through 2018. And on the right, you can see some very well-known brand names. But the very top line of ODM Direct has been growing substantially since 2017. ODM Direct means that end customers are buying direct from the manufacturer and not through an OEM. Inspur is also an ODM. However, IDC has pulled them out of the list for this particular graph. But Inspur and ODM between 2016 and 2018 grew significantly. So what's happening in 2020 continues to really outpace the competitors. Inspur growing at a 52% year over year. ODM Direct growing at 60% year over year. And what this means is that most of the ODMs are actually OCP members and open sourcing their hardware designs. So people are becoming more comfortable buying direct from the manufacturer, and they're open sourcing those designs. And when you take white box and ODM hardware and you combine open source, that is the foundation for the Open Compute project. It's a very big market and continuing to grow. So open hardware, or OCP hardware, will be growing 46% this year alone and reaching $11 billion by 2023. The open networking market alone is $1.3 billion by 2023. And the types of companies that are looking at open compute, driven largely by telcos, cloud service providers, gaming, cloud-enabled or cloud-native companies, fintech, retail, oil and gas, and public sector, all starting to look at open hardware. The OCP community itself is over 200 companies, 8,000 engineers in our community working across the data center, and over 190 contributions. Here's a list of our projects. These are the top level projects. We have around 15 to 20 projects and sub-projects, all led by volunteers and all working across different areas of the data center, including networking, edge, HPC, and security. There are four things that drive everything that we do within OCP: efficiency, scale, impact, and openness. And I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can look at each one of these aspects, but let me give you just one example. This is a plastic server bezel. It is the piece of plastic that goes on the front of a server. And there are hundreds of them. But within the OCP community, we have this real passion for simplicity and getting rid of the things that we do not need. So here is an OCP server. Very minimalistic, very open, and I want to draw your attention to these tiny green touch points on each one of the servers. These touch points are designed where a server technician can replace and repair any component on this server within 3 minutes without using a tool. So that's just one example of how the community has really focused on simplifying hardware infrastructure. So who are some of these ODMs that made up that big growth? Well, I mentioned Infra previously. There's MyTech and WeWin, who focus on compute and storage. And on the networking side, it's Delta, EdgeCore, NVIDIA, and UfiSpace. And maybe you've never heard of some of these companies, but they're quite large and they're the ones driving this ODM market. So why would someone open source hardware designs? Well, the reasons are very similar to why someone open sources their software. But in the hardware area, if I'm an adopter of open compute hardware, I like the idea of having multiple suppliers based off of one specification. It helps mitigate my supply chain risk. The other thing, if I'm an adopter, it allows me to influence the technology roadmap. So I can work within these projects, share my needs, and make sure that these vendors are meeting my requirements. And if I'm a vendor or a supplier, I can get access and speed to new markets by working in a community. And I get a broader perspective on customer requirements and market direction. So that's what's happening within open hardware and the market. But let's talk about how software is impacting hardware. With the advent of virtualization back in 2008, we saw the amount of hardware that is needed to run applications dramatically decrease to 33% less. And as virtualization increased, that number has increased to 66% less hardware needed to run those applications. A good example of this is Facebook's web servers. So at the time they were growing quite rapidly. So they decided to create an open source solution to help minimize the number of web servers they needed. So they created something called Hip Hop Virtual Machine. And through open source, they were able to reduce the number of web servers they needed by 80%. So software is eating hardware. Even at Deutsche Bank, when they went through a technology refresh, they realized that through virtualization and through open source and through software, they can reduce the number of servers they need by 2/3. So software really is eating hardware. So when it comes to open source hardware, what am I talking about? Well, you can see the types of open compute hardware on our OCP marketplace around servers, storage, networking devices, even full data centers on our marketplace. But let me give you a couple of examples. Here's an open edge server designed for a shorter form factor in edge deployments being used by telco and perhaps some retail customers, running Red Hat and OpenStack. We have compute servers running Red Hat as well as Sardina. And Sardina has a Kubernetes management platform that is extremely strong and runs very, very well on open hardware. We have networking devices running Sonic and running open networking foundation software like Stratum and Volta and even Siba. And we also have storage devices running Linbit's LinStore, which is a block storage management platform. All open source software running on open source hardware. So those are components. We have full rack integrated solutions, access racks, entire OpenShift container platforms, and even architecting an entire 5G disaggregated network with open hardware underneath, running open software. As software continues to drive everything in the market, you can disaggregate the software from the hardware layer, and it allows you to start buying direct from the manufacturer to help reduce your CapEx. And as I'd mentioned, it's even full data centers. These are modular data centers. It could be between 10 racks and 30 racks in this modular platform, all contained with OCP hardware running Kubernetes platforms inside a container. And many of these containers are being deployed in remote locations or also in urban areas. And with the increased demand on medical facilities, this is also a great solution for those needs. So if you're a software developer, you might be thinking that I don't have access to a full rack of hardware. I don't know how to start with open hardware. So one of our members, IT Renew, has put together a Fast Start, which is a small desk side unit that allows you to test open compute hardware within a very limited space and a limited budget. So I wanted to share this video with you on Fast Start. So that's open source hardware underneath your desk and ready to use. So please do reach out to me if that is of interest, and I'm happy to connect you with IT Renew to get you started. So I wanted to leave you with one area, which is how open hardware is affecting 5G in the edge. Almost every day there's an article about 5G, but more and more you see 5G plus open source or open infrastructure. And this is a really monumental shift in the way that people will view open source infrastructure. And I've included a link to a presentation that I highly recommend from the CTO of Rakuten that was put on by the Open Networking Foundation. He does a great job of explaining the options that they had developing their network, how they could have done proprietary, legacy, traditional hardware versus open hardware and open software. So I highly encourage you to watch this video when you have a minute. This is one slide from his recent article showing the benefits of open hardware and open software and the effect that open architecture had on his total cost of ownership. So really impressive numbers from Rakuten. Other telcos are going through the same thing. Telefonica is starting to use open hardware in their central office deployments or their edge deployments. And AT&T replacing a lot of their routers with open hardware and contributing those designs back into the open source community. So how do I get involved? Contact Jung Soo. He's a great first point of contact, and he knows the community extremely well and can help direct you to the right resources. You can also visit our OCP marketplace, and if you have any questions, you can certainly contact me at steve@opencompute.org. You can also become a member, can join a project, collaborate, and contribute. So thank you everyone for taking the time today, and I sure hope you have a fantastic Open Infrastructure Community Day in Korea. Cheers.